Many people assume that people who enjoy being alone were simply born that way. They imagine that some people naturally love socializing, while others naturally prefer solitude. But psychologists have long suspected that our relationship with being alone often begins much earlier than we realize, long before adulthood, long before careers, relationships, and responsibilities. Sometimes, childhood quietly shapes how comfortable we become with our own company. And that raises an intriguing question connected to today's thumbnail. People who prefer being alone had this childhood. Is it possible that certain childhood experiences make solitude feel comforting instead of uncomfortable? Because here's something most people never consider. Two people can spend an entire weekend alone for completely different psychological reasons. One person enjoys solitude because they feel secure, independent, and emotionally balanced. Another may enjoy solitude because very early in life, they learned that relying on themselves felt safer than relying on other people. From the outside, both look exactly the same, but beneath the surface, the psychology can be very different. And that's why people who like being alone are often misunderstood. They're frequently labeled as shy, antisocial, distant, or lonely. Yet many of them don't feel lonely at all. In fact, some people feel they're most authentic, creative, and emotionally recharged when nobody else is around. They don't experience solitude as something they must endure. They experience it as something they genuinely value. But does preferring solitude always signal emotional strength and independence? Or can it sometimes reveal patterns that began much earlier in life? The answer is more complicated than most people think, because the childhood experiences that shape a person's relationship with solitude can produce both remarkable strengths and hidden struggles. And once you understand the psychology behind that preference, you may begin to see yourself and the people around you in a completely different way. So before assuming that someone who enjoys being alone is disconnected from the world, it's worth considering another possibility. What if solitude isn't something they're escaping into? What if it's something they've learned to understand better than most people ever do? The biggest misunderstanding about people who enjoy being alone. One of the biggest misconceptions about people who enjoy being alone is the belief that they must be lonely. But loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is the painful feeling of wanting connection and not having it. Solitude is the choice to spend time alone because it feels peaceful, meaningful, or emotionally restorative. That's why a person can be surrounded by friends and still feel lonely, while someone else can spend an entire afternoon alone and feel perfectly content. And this is where many people get confused. When they see someone spending a lot of time alone, they assume something must be wrong. They assume that person is isolated, unhappy, or struggling socially. But in many cases, the opposite is true. Some people enjoy solitude not because they dislike others, but because they genuinely enjoy their own company. They don't need constant conversation, constant stimulation, or constant reassurance to feel okay. In fact, the ability to be alone comfortably may be more unusual than most people realize. Think about it. How many people immediately reach for their phone the moment they find themselves alone? How many turn on music, videos, podcasts, or social media simply to avoid a few minutes of silence? For many people, being alone means facing their own thoughts. And that's not always comfortable, because when distractions disappear, whatever has been hiding beneath the noise often becomes impossible to ignore. Yet, people who genuinely enjoy solitude often experience that silence differently. Instead of feeling trapped by their thoughts, they feel free to explore them. Instead of escaping themselves, they become comfortable with themselves. And that raises a deeper question. Why does solitude feel peaceful for some people, but uncomfortable for others? Why do some people crave constant connection, while others seem perfectly content standing on their own? To answer that question, we may have to look much further back than adulthood. We may have to look at childhood. The childhood pattern behind solitude. For many people, their relationship with solitude begins long before they ever realize it. Childhood is where we first learn how to relate to other people, how to seek comfort, and how to make sense of ourselves. And sometimes, without anyone intending it, a child spends more time alone than others. Perhaps their parents were loving, but often busy. Perhaps emotional support wasn't always available when they needed it. Perhaps they were the quiet child who spent more time observing than speaking. Or perhaps they simply learned very early that many of their problems would have to be solved on their own. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. While other children rely heavily on the world around them for stimulation, attention, and reassurance, these children often begin developing a rich inner world. They learn how to entertain themselves, how to think for themselves, how to sit with their thoughts for long periods of time. They become observers, the child who watches more than they speak, the child who notices things others miss, the child who spends hours imagining, analyzing, reflecting, and trying to understand the world around them. And those habits often don't disappear in adulthood. They become part of who that person is. But here's where the story becomes more complicated. Many people assume that spending a lot of time alone during childhood automatically creates insecurity or social difficulties. Yet in some cases, the opposite happens. When a child repeatedly learns how to comfort themselves, solve their own problems, and manage their own emotions, they often develop a strong sense of independence. They become less dependent on constant approval, less concerned with fitting in, less afraid of standing apart from the crowd. But there is an important distinction many people overlook. Some people learn self-reliance because they genuinely enjoy their own company. Others learn it because at some point, relying on themselves felt safer than relying on anyone else. From the outside, both may look exactly the same. Both may enjoy spending time alone. Both may seem independent, but beneath the surface, the psychology can be very different. And understanding that difference may explain why solitude becomes a source of strength for some people and a form of protection for others. And that brings us to one of the most surprising qualities often found in people who genuinely enjoy being alone. The surprising qualities of people who enjoy being alone. One reason people who enjoy solitude are often misunderstood is that many of their strongest qualities develop in places other people rarely look. After all, when someone spends a significant amount of time alone, something interesting happens. They spend more time with their own thoughts. And whether they realize it or not, that often changes them. For example, many people who enjoy solitude develop a strong sense of self-awareness. When you're alone, there are fewer distractions competing for your attention, fewer voices telling you what to think, fewer opportunities to escape your own thoughts. So over time, you begin learning who you are, what you value, what matters to you, what doesn't. And that self-awareness often creates another quality, independent thinking. Because if you've spent years forming your own opinions, you're usually less dependent on the approval of a group to tell you what to believe. You're less likely to follow every trend, less likely to agree with everyone simply to fit in, and more willing to think for yourself. Many people who enjoy solitude also notice something else. They often need time alone to process experiences. After a stressful day, a difficult conversation, or a major life decision, their instinct isn't always to seek more noise. It's to step back and think, to understand what they're feeling before reacting to it. And over time, that habit can create a surprising degree of emotional resilience. Not because life becomes easier, but because they've developed the ability to sit with their emotions instead of constantly running from them. Even creativity often grows in the same environment. Many of the mind's most interesting ideas emerge during quiet moments, when there's finally enough space to connect thoughts that would otherwise remain unnoticed. But here's the part that makes this topic far more complicated than it first appears. All of these qualities can develop through healthy solitude. Yet from the outside, healthy solitude can look remarkably similar to something else. A person who enjoys being alone because they feel secure often behaves very differently from a person who enjoys being alone because they've learned not to trust others completely. Both may spend time alone. Both may appear independent. Both may seem comfortable by themselves, but the reason behind that solitude can be entirely different. And that difference may be one of the most important things to understand about people who prefer being alone. When solitude becomes protection. While some people choose solitude because they genuinely enjoy it, others are drawn to it for a different reason. Sometimes, being alone feels safer. When a person experiences enough disappointment, rejection, betrayal, criticism, or emotional neglect, the mind begins paying attention. It starts looking for patterns, and sometimes it reaches a quiet conclusion. Being alone hurts less. That doesn't mean the person stops wanting connection. In many cases, they still care deeply about relationships. They still value friendship, trust, and emotional closeness. But after enough painful experiences, they may stop expecting those things to come easily, so they become more cautious, more guarded, more selective about who they allow into their lives. Because when you're alone, nobody can betray your trust. Nobody can disappoint you. Nobody can make you feel unseen or unwanted. And for a while, that sense of safety can feel comforting. In fact, many people who prefer solitude are not avoiding people altogether. They're simply trying to avoid repeating experiences that once hurt them. That's why some individuals grow older and become increasingly selective with relationships. They stop chasing large social circles. They stop seeking approval from everyone around them. And instead, they begin valuing a small number of genuine connections. But here's where the distinction becomes important. Healthy solitude feels peaceful. Protective solitude feels necessary. One comes from genuine comfort with yourself. The other comes from a desire to avoid emotional pain. And from the outside, both can look almost identical. The person who enjoys being alone because they feel secure may behave very similarly to the person who enjoys being alone because they've learned not to trust easily. Yet the psychology beneath those choices is completely different. And there is one risk many people never notice. What begins as protection can slowly become avoidance. The walls that protect you from disappointment can also keep out the very connections you're hoping to find. Which leads to an important question. How can you tell whether your desire for solitude is helping you grow into yourself or quietly preventing you from opening yourself to life? The real meaning of being alone. The truth is, there's nothing inherently wrong with enjoying your own company. In fact, in a world filled with constant noise, endless distractions, and pressure to always stay connected, the ability to sit comfortably with yourself may be one of the rarest skills a person can develop. But as we've seen throughout this video, not all solitude comes from the same place. Some people enjoy being alone because it gives them space to think, reflect, create, and recharge. Others learned very early in life how to rely on themselves and became comfortable walking their own path. And for some, solitude became a form of protection, a way to avoid the disappointment, rejection, or emotional pain they experienced in the past. From the outside, those people may look exactly the same, yet the psychology behind their solitude can be completely different. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. The question was never whether you enjoy being alone. The real question is why. Because healthy solitude can help a person develop self-awareness, independence, creativity, and inner peace. But when solitude becomes a wall that keeps everyone out, it can slowly become a prison disguised as safety. The goal isn't to spend every moment with people, and that isn't to spend every moment alone. It's to reach a place where both feel comfortable, where your happiness doesn't depend entirely on other people, but where you're also willing to let meaningful connections into your life. Perhaps the strongest sign of emotional maturity isn't constantly seeking people, nor avoiding them completely. It's having the freedom to choose. So before you leave, consider one final question. When you're alone, do you feel peace or do you feel relief? Because those two feelings may look similar on the surface, but they often come from very different places, and the answer may reveal more about your psychology than you realize. If this video resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you enjoy being alone because it brings you peace, or because it feels safer than opening up to others? Share your perspective in the comments below. Reading your experiences is always one of the most interesting parts of these discussions. And if you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like. It helps more people discover the channel and supports future videos exploring the hidden psychology behind human behavior, personality, and self-discovery. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.